Eala did not just give away a shirt in Rome. She gave away a moment the entire WTA will never forget. What started as a simple gesture after one of the most electrifying matches of the Italian Open became a worldwide phenomenon overnight, leaving Roger Federer visibly shaken, leaving tournament officials scrambling for answers, and leaving an entire stadium of Italian fans absolutely breathless. Nobody predicted this. Nobody scripted it. And yet, it happened. Because sometimes the smallest acts carry the heaviest weight. And sometimes a 22-year-old from the Philippines walks into the heart of European tennis and reminds the whole world exactly why this sport still has a soul. Chapter 1. The Girl Who Was Never Supposed to Be Here. Long before the Roman crowd erupted, long before the cameras caught a moment that circled the globe in hours, Eala was just a teenager with a racket, a dream, and a country behind her that had never produced a Grand Slam champion. Born in Manila in 1905, Eala grew up watching tennis through a screen, a sport that felt foreign to the archipelago, that felt like it belonged to the cold courts of Europe and the manicured grass of Wimbledon, not to the tropical humidity of Southeast Asia. And yet, something burned inside her, something relentless. At 14, she walked into the Rafael Nadal Academy in Manacor, Spain, as the only Filipino, in many ways the only Southeast Asian, enrolled in one of the most competitive developmental programs on the planet. She was surrounded by players whose nations had decades of tennis infrastructure behind them. She had heart, grit, and an iron belief that she belonged. She did not crumble, she conquered. By the time she was 17, Eala had won 2 Grand Slam junior titles. The 2022 U.S. Open Girls Singles Championship did not just announce her arrival, it announced a new era for Asian tennis. Sports analysts across the continent began paying attention, sponsors circled, the WTA Tour opened its doors wider. But junior glory and professional survival are 2 entirely different battles, and as Eala stepped onto the full WTA circuit, a different pressure descended. She was no longer just a talented teenager from Manacor. She was a symbol, a flag bearer. 15 million Filipinos watched her every match. Every loss carried weight beyond the scoreline. Every victory felt like a national celebration. She carried it, all of it, with a quiet dignity that the tennis world began to notice and respect. By the spring of 2025, Eala had punched through into the top 100 of the WTA rankings, a milestone that sent the Philippines into a frenzy. Her ground strokes had sharpened into weapons. Her movement had transformed from promising into elite. She was no longer a curiosity, she was a contender. Which is exactly why when the draw for the 2025 Italian Open placed her in a quarterfinal clash against one of the circuit's most established names, nobody dismissed it as a mismatch. Everybody leaned in. What happened next rewrote the entire conversation. Rome in May carries its own particular electricity. The clay of the Foro Italico has absorbed decades of sweat, tears, and championship drama. The Italian crowd is not passive, they are participants. They whistle, they sing, they turn matches into theater. And they were there in full voice when Eala stepped onto the center court for what many assumed would be a respectable but ultimately predictable defeat. The first set told a different story. Eala came out swinging, not tentatively, not defensively, but with controlled aggression of someone who had studied her opponent for months and believed every syllable of her preparation. Her forehand down the line drew gasps from the Italian stands. Her drop shots were disguised to the point of cruelty. She broke early, she held her serve with authority, she took the first set 6-3, and the Foro Italico leaned forward in its seat. The second set tightened into warfare, Both players refused to yield. The crowd, initially neutral, began gravitating towards Eala, not just because of the tennis, but because of the way she carried herself. Between points, she bounced on her heels, she clapped her own fist, she communicated with the crowd without a single word, through sheer electric presence. Tiebreak. 7 points of theater. A double fault that stilled the crowd. An ace down the tee that brought them back to their feet. Eala, serving at 6-6, stepped up to the baseline, bounced the ball 3 times, and produced the cleanest, flattest serve of the entire match. The tiebreak went to her. The set went to her. The match went to her. 6-3, 7-6. A semi-final berth at the Italian Open, a Filipino woman in the last 4 of a premier-level WTA event in Rome. The crowd exploded, and in the stands, watching from a private guest box with a small entourage, someone who had seen thousands of matches across decades of professional tennis sat completely still for a long, silent moment. Roger Federer's expression, caught by a courtside camera that had no idea what was about to happen next, said everything. His words had not yet formed.
2 days after the clip surfaced, during an appearance at a Laver Cup organizational press function in Geneva, Roger Federer was asked directly about the Eala footage. He did not deflect. He did not minimize. "I've watched thousands of matches," he said, choosing his words with the careful precision of someone who understood exactly how they would travel. That moment in Rome, that girl going to the crowd, specifically to that child, doing it without being asked, without cameras following her, that reached me somewhere I wasn't expecting. He paused. "I'm not ashamed of that." The room, which had been expecting tennis logistics, fell into stunned silence. Within an hour, those 14 words, "I'm not ashamed of that," were trending on every major sports platform across 3 continents. Federer had, intentionally or otherwise, transformed a singular post-match gesture by a young Filipina athlete into a global conversation about what sport actually means, what it stands for beyond titles and rankings and prize money, what it offers to a child holding a handmade sign in a foreign city, standing on her tiptoes, hoping to be seen. The WTA's president issued a statement calling the episode a perfect example of the human spirit of tennis. The ITF followed hours later with its own endorsement. But the most significant response came from the Philippine Olympic Committee, which announced that Eala had been selected as the flag bearer for the Philippine contingent at an upcoming international multi-sport event, an honor traditionally reserved for the nation's most decorated athletes. She had not won a Grand Slam. She had not captured a premier mandatory title. She had given a shirt to a child. And that was enough. Don't go anywhere. The final chapter of the story holds something that no analyst predicted, and it might just change how you think about what tennis is really building toward. There is a question that professional sport never adequately answers. What survives beyond the trophies? Titles get broken. Records get eclipsed. The dominant players of one generation become trivia questions for the next. Federer knows this. Serena Williams knows this. Every champion who has ever held hardware above their head knows that the hardware is temporary. But a child standing in a Roman crowd, holding a shirt with both hands pressed against her chest, looking up at the athlete who gave it to her, that moment lives in that child for the rest of her life. It becomes the story she tells her children. It becomes the reason she picks up a racket. It becomes, quietly and without ceremony, the spark that lights the next generation. Eala lost her semifinal. The opponent was sharper on the day, more experienced in high-leverage situations, and Eala would be the first to acknowledge the gap that still exists between where she stands and where she intends to arrive. She walked off the Foro Italico clay with a runner-up run and her head straight. But in the 48 hours between the shirt moment and her semifinal exit, something had crystallized around her name that no tennis result could manufacture. She had become, involuntarily, authentically, a symbol of what the sport can be when its practitioners remember who they are playing for. Federer, in his Geneva remarks, went further than the headline quote. He spoke about the responsibility of visibility, about what it means for young players in emerging tennis nations to see someone who looks like them competing at the highest level and winning. He specifically cited the Asian tennis ecosystem, noting that the game's next significant expansion of fan base and participation would likely emerge from that region, and that players like Eala were the bridge between the institutional history of European and American tennis and the aspiring millions watching from screens across the Pacific. He said the game needs her to succeed, not as flattery, as analysis. The WTA, for its part, began fast-tracking conversations about Eala's potential as a promotional ambassador for the organization's Asia-Pacific development initiatives. Whether she accepts that role, whether she prefers to let her racket do all the communication, remains to be seen. What cannot be unseen is the footage. What cannot be unknown is the reaction it produced. What cannot be undone is the conversation it started. About purpose, about generosity, about the extraordinary weight of small gestures made in extraordinary moments. Eala walked into the Italian Open as a top 100 contender, making her case. She walked out as something the sport does not manufacture, someone worth paying attention to for reasons that have nothing to do with a ranking. And somewhere in Manila, a young boy or girl is now watching their first tennis match, not because of a Grand Slam, not because of a record broken or a milestone surpassed, because of a shirt. So here is the question worth arguing about in the comments below. Is what happened in Rome a beautiful accident, or is Eala already writing a legacy that will outlast whatever title she eventually wins? Tell us what you think. We read every comment. Eala came to Rome to compete. She left having redefined for one powerful moment what competing actually means. Roger Federer's tears said what television ratings and ranking points cannot, that this sport still has the capacity to reach beyond the court and touch something real. Eala did not plan this. She simply acted from instinct, and the world responded with its full, undivided attention.